Going no contact with a narcissist is never just the act of walking away from a person. It is the moment you are forced to face yourself in the rawest, most unguarded way. There is no applause, no praise, no divine light shining down on you instantly. There is only stillness, emptiness, and a tightness in your chest, as if you've just stepped out of a storm you didn't even realize you survived. And it is in that very moment, when you believe you are at your weakest, that a sacred lesson begins to unfold. People often say, God teaches us through love, but the deepest lessons usually come in the form of pain. Not because he wants to hurt you, but because he sees the places where you're clinging to something that was never meant to be yours. And sometimes, the only way he can free you is to force you to let go. With a narcissist, what you release is not just a relationship. You are releasing an illusion, a chapter of your life where you traded your intuition for hope, your boundaries for a false sense of peace, your identity for tiny drops of affection they used as bait. Jung said that every fateful encounter has a reason, rooted in the unconscious. You walked into their life not to become a victim, but to see the parts of yourself you had buried for far too long. But you leave them for an even greater reason, because your soul has begun to awaken. No contact is the stage where God forces you to return to your inner voice, the very voice you silenced in order to hold onto someone who was never meant to be yours. This is not a test of your strength. It is a rite of transformation, bringing you back to your rightful place in your own life. Because to be free, you must learn to step out of places where your soul cannot breathe. Because to mature, you must learn to choose yourself, even when your heart is trembling. And because to walk into the light, sometimes God needs you to pass through the darkness, alone. Going no contact is not the end of love. It is the end of illusion. It is the moment you realize that God is not taking someone away from you, He is leading you back to yourself. You have crossed the first threshold of the greater lesson. The rest is the journey of your soul. Part 1. Why you were called to learn the lesson of no contact. When an empath falls into the vortex of a narcissist, it is never a random encounter. There is something operating beneath the surface, a hidden force, like a call rising from the depths of your unconscious and theirs, pulling two souls together in a way that few can explain. To the outside world, it looks like a wrong relationship, an unhealthy attachment, a cycle of giving, hurting, begging, forgiving on repeat. But to Jung, this is an archetypal encounter, a crossroads where the unhealed shadows within you find their perfect reflection in the fractures within them. And that is why separating is never simple. You are not just walking away from a person. You are walking away from a psychological structure that pulled you into it from the deepest parts of your being. What many people don't understand is this: forgiving a narcissist is easy, leaving them is what tears the soul. Because within you exists something they do not have, the capacity to feel, to empathize, to see the truth in others. But that very gift makes you their anchor, the place they grip tightly to fill their inner void. And before you know it, you become the mirror that reflects their false self. You become the light they feed on. You become the confessional they run to, while also being the place where they dump all their shadow. This relationship does not run on love. It runs on unconscious exchange. You give them light, and they pour into you the pieces of darkness they refuse to face. But there comes a moment when your soul grows tired. Your energy begins to drain. Your intuition starts to ache. Your heart begins sending signals you have ignored for far too long. That is the moment you are called. In ancient spiritual traditions, this is known as karmic exhaustion, the point at which your soul has fulfilled its role in a particular lesson. In Jungian psychology, this is when unconscious material rises from the shadow, forcing you to confront yourself. Why did you endure this for so long? Why did you continue to hope when there was nothing left to hope for? Why did you place your life force in the hands of someone who never valued it? And deeper still, why did you feel responsible for healing someone who never intended to change? The moment you recognize these questions is the first signal from God, a subtle but powerful voice echoing from the deepest layer of your being. Enough? Not enough in anger, but enough in the sense that your soul has outgrown the lesson the narcissist was sent to activate. You no longer belong in that environment. The light within you begins to expand beyond the box they tried to confine you in. And when that light grows, you feel you cannot remain in that suffocation for even one more second. No contact is not just a decision, it is an inevitability. When a soul evolves, it cannot shrink to fit a place it has surpassed. That is why you are the one called to learn this lesson. Not because you are weak, not because you are fragile, but because you are the only one in that relationship who possesses the capacity to awaken, to see the truth, to break the cycle. You were chosen not to suffer, but to evolve. And the narcissist was the catalyst, not the destiny. They arrive to stir the shadows within you, but you leave them to awaken your true light. The lesson of no contact begins here. In the moment you realize you are no longer bound to the role of savior, or the role of the one who endures, or the role of the peacemaker, you begin stepping out of the script you once believed you were required to play. It is the moment you stand for yourself. It is the moment your soul answers the call of God. Part 2. The nature of the unconscious bond in a narcissistic relationship. To understand why no contact is the hardest lesson, you must look directly at what kept you there for so long. It wasn't love. It wasn't the good memories. It was a form of unconscious attachment stronger than any promise or surface emotion. Jung called this the unconscious contract. A soul-level agreement formed not through words, but through the deepest wounds within you and within them, finding each other in the dark. The danger of a relationship with a narcissist is that everything happens beneath the surface. They do not bind you with logic, but through subtle manipulation of your nervous system and the nameless wounds you've carried since childhood. You don't always notice it, but the moment you feel the urge to save them, to stay because there's hope, or to be the only one who truly understands them, you have already signed an invisible contract. A contract activated not by awareness, but by the parts of you that have longed to be seen, heard, and chosen. The narcissist awakens these needs in a way no one else does. They read your vulnerability like a map. They mirror what you lack, what you want, what you never dared to ask for. That is not love, it is mirroring. A tactic that makes you feel as if you found your destined other half. And that feeling of destiny becomes the glue that makes leaving feel like psychological surgery. But the price of mirroring is the gradual erosion of your boundaries. You begin to overlook the abnormal, rationalize cruelty, justify harm, and even treat suffering as proof of love. Worse still, you begin to believe that only you can see the goodness inside them, that if you try just a little harder, they will change. That is the trap. When you believe you have a special role, you unconsciously hand them the power to define your worth. This is not your fault. It is how the unconscious behaves when it meets the right archetype. You carry the wound of the healer, and they carry the shadow of the wounded king. These two archetypes are magnetized to each other in a way that feels irresistible. But that attraction is not meant for love. It is meant for activation. They did not come to stay. They came to expose the fractures within you that you hid too well. In neuropsychology, this is also known as trauma bonding, a connection built on emotional whiplash, where dopamine, cortisol, and adrenaline mix together and make you confuse chaos with love. The narcissist unconsciously creates this pattern, sometimes lifting you to heaven, sometimes throwing you into the abyss. And your nervous system, conditioned to predict, wait, and hope, becomes addicted to that rhythm. This is why no contact is not just a decision, it is a detox. A detox not of the body, but of identity itself. Because when you leave them, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself you built around them. That is the real pain, not the loss of the person, but the loss of the role you believed you were born to fulfill. And here is the key. When your soul begins to grow larger than your wounds, the unconscious contract dissolves on its own. You no longer vibrate at the old frequency. The trap no longer holds. The cycle no longer convinces you that this is love. That is the signal that you are ready for the lesson. And God, in a very subtle way, pushes you toward the exact threshold you must cross. No contact becomes the doorway not because you want to leave, but because your soul can no longer remain in a place that doesn't match its level of growth. You are pulled out not by strength, but by the inability to continue betraying yourself. And as you begin withdrawing your energy, the unconscious cord begins to crack. The narcissist senses this immediately. That shift triggers their panic. But that is a story for the next part. For now, what you must understand is this. You leave not because they are wrong and not because you are exhausted. You leave because your soul has graduated from the lesson they were sent to activate. And no contact is the symbolic act of that maturity. Part 3. The soul shock when no contact begins. When you begin no contact, the first thing you expect is peace, but the first thing you actually experience is chaos. This is the cruel paradox of healing. You walk away from the darkness, but the darkness has not yet walked away from you. Your body leaves them first, your soul leaves second, and your mind is the place that takes the first blow when the unconscious cord is severed. This isn't because you are weak or because your love was too deep. It is the natural response of a nervous system being pulled away from a source of intense stimulation it had adapted to. In neuroscience, this is called withdrawal, a form of emotional detox. In Jungian depth psychology, this stage is known as nigredo, the primordial chaos, where the old self collapses, but the new self has not yet formed. The moment you block them, unfollow them, stop replying, or simply disrupt the patterns that kept the cycle alive, you feel as if you have detached from a part of your own body, not because they were a part of you, but because you once used them to fill the empty spaces you were afraid to touch. In the first few days, you will feel 3 parallel types of pain. It's the pain of losing connection, the pain of losing the illusion, the pain of beginning to confront yourself. The first pain makes you want to go back. The second makes you feel foolish. The third makes you fear moving forward. But at the intersection of these 3 pains, the true lesson of no contact begins to operate. Your nervous system, once trained to predict them, analyze them, wait for them, no longer knows what to anchor itself to. Silence. The very thing you once craved inside the toxic relationship suddenly becomes the loudest sound. You hear every noise inside your mind, self-blame, longing, doubt, fear, all at once like a flood. Many people mistake this for still being in love, but in reality it is simply your body entering detox. The hardest part of no contact is not resisting the urge to text them, it is stopping the belief that only they can give you peace. That is the most painful detachment, because you are not just leaving them, you are leaving behind a version of yourself that believed love required suffering. And when you abandon that version, your mind has no idea what to replace it with. This emptiness feels so vast that it almost feels like your soul is collapsing inward. In Jungian analysis, this is the intermediate zone, the liminal space between the old persona and the true self. In this space, everything becomes blurry. Memories fade, logic trembles, the heart wavers, and identity becomes fluid. You no longer recognize who you are, but you also don't know who you are becoming. This is why empaths often want to return, not because they still love, but because they are unfamiliar with the emptiness of freedom. There is another, deeper source of soul shock. You realize you no longer have anyone left to save. The role you once poured your life into suddenly becomes meaningless. You were the one they confided in, the one they needed, the one who absorbed all their darkness. But when you close that door, you are confronted with a question you have avoided for years. If I'm not saving anyone, then who am I? This is the moment many people cry without understanding why. You are not crying for them. You are crying for yourself, because you suddenly see how much time you spent being who the world needed instead of becoming who you needed. Then something strange happens, a feeling like a line of spiritual electricity running up your spine, a sensation of being lost yet full of potential. You are no longer pulled toward them, but you are not yet pulled fully toward yourself. You stand in the space between two realities. The old has dissolved, the new has not yet formed. This is where the soul grows. This is the fire of rebirth. Jung once said, "There is no awakening without pain, and no contact is the first ache of a soul learning to live without relying on someone else's darkness to define itself." The soul shock is not a sign you are wrong. It is proof you are detaching from what once imprisoned you. And once you endure this stage, everything begins to shift in the direction your soul has been waiting for all along. Part 4. The narcissist's panic response when you withdraw your energy. What most people don't know is that a narcissist senses your withdrawal long before you realize you're doing it. You may not have blocked them, you may not have disappeared, you may still be polite, still responding, still acting normal, but the energy inside you, the light they depend on to feel alive, has already shifted direction. And to them, that shift is an invisible earthquake. In Jungian psychology, a narcissist does not exist as a unified self. They survive through a constructed persona, held together by the reflections of others. Once the mirror stops shining, the persona cracks. And when the persona cracks, the shadow rises. The moment the shadow rises is what we call the shadow panic response. This reaction is not emotional. It is existential terror. It's not jealousy. It's not anger. It feels, psychologically, like someone who depends on a life support machine hearing the machine slow down. There is no ordinary human emotion comparable to the fear a narcissist experiences when they realize they no longer control you. This panic unfolds in layers, each one revealing a deeper stage of internal collapse. Layer 1, soft hoovering. They suddenly become unusually kind, gentle, nostalgic. Apologies appear. Sweet memories resurface. Not because they miss you, but because they are testing, a soft push to see whether the cord is fully severed. They always test your softness before they deploy stronger tactics. Layer 2, hard hoovering. When kindness fails, they activate guilt. I'm a changed man. You're the only one who understands me. No one will love you like I do. These are not declarations of love. These are boundary-dissolving strategies. They don't want you back out of love. They want you back out of power. Layer 3, panic rage. When the first two layers fail, their deepest fear surfaces. They rage because you are becoming someone they cannot control. They rage because their silence no longer scares you. They rage because your silence is now stronger than their storm. Layer 4, smear campaign. When they can no longer control your mind, they attempt to control the minds of others. They twist stories, slander you, paint themselves as the victim and you as the monster. This is how they try to restore their cracked persona, by managing your image in the eyes of others. Layer 5, shadow possession. This is the most dangerous stage. Without your reflection, their shadow swallows them. A narcissist is an empty structure. They remain stable only when someone else absorbs their darkness. When you disappear, all the darkness they once dumped onto you comes back to its true owner. They feel paralyzed, hollow, meaningless, a psychological implosion. What they once projected onto you now consumes them. Layer 6, the final hunt, is the narcissist's last card, a manipulation engineered to hit your deepest wound. It could be a dramatic threat of permanent separation, a promise of total transformation, an emotional breakdown, or a hit to your compassion. I'm sick. I've lost everything. They will use anything to pull you back. not because they love you, but because they cannot tolerate existing alone with themselves. All these layers point to one single truth. A narcissist doesn't fear losing you, they fear losing the version of themselves that only you made possible. When you withdraw your energy, they don't just lose a person, they lose the identity they built on your light. This activates their deepest terror, the fear of invisibility, exposure, and having no one left to uphold their counterfeit self. Their pain is not the pain of love, it is the pain of a collapsing ego. And it is in this panic that you finally see what you could never see before. You were never weak. They were never strong. They survived by feeding on the strength you carried so naturally. And now that you've taken your energy back, they are forced to confront the truth they've run from all their lives. Without you, all they have left is their own darkness. Part 5. The Sacred Stillness. When God uses silence to restructure your soul. The strangest part of no contact is not their absence, but the arrival of something you forgot you even had. Silence. Not outer silence, but inner silence. The kind that was stolen from you during the relationship you thought was love, but was in truth a storm, stretched over months or years. In the early days of no contact, this silence terrifies you. It is vast, it is deep, and it feels like a dark, empty room where all you can do is sit down and listen to the sound of your own heartbeat. But God always begins healing in the place where you are weakest, and silence is his first instrument, not to make you lonely, but to bring you back to the voice you buried under the noise of narcissistic chaos. From a Jungian perspective, this stage is called withdrawal of projection. Every ounce of energy you once poured into them, hope, fear, longing, belief, love, endurance, now returns to the place it truly belongs, your own heart. You don't yet know what to do with that returning energy. It is too much, too real, too alive. But precisely because of that, it becomes the raw material of rebirth. The silence you are facing is not emptiness. It is space for reconstruction. Like a forest after a wildfire, desolate on the surface, yet beneath the ash, thousands of seeds tremble with new life. Your soul works the same way. You may not feel it immediately, but everything inside you is moving slowly and steadily in a sacred direction, back toward yourself. You begin to hear things you could never hear in the narcissistic storm. You hear your real sadness, not sadness for them, but sadness for the parts of you that were abandoned. You hear your intuition, the voice that was silenced by gaslighting and subtle attacks. You hear your own heart, whose rhythm had been forced to follow the instability of another instead of its own natural beat. Then, after the initial dizziness fades, you discover something that shakes your inner world. Without them, you breathe more easily. Without them, you no longer walk on emotional shards of glass. Without them, you don't have to decode chaos. You no longer have to guess, fear, endure, or shrink yourself to fit a distorted version of love. And at that moment, the silence begins to change color. It is no longer an empty room. It becomes an inner sanctuary, a place where God touches the parts of you you once hid, not through loud miracles, but through small shifts. A deeper breath, a night of peaceful sleep, a morning without heaviness in the chest, a moment where you smile at something so simple you previously couldn't feel. This silence is inner alchemy, the process of transformation Jung described. The greatest dissolution, albedo, purification, rubedo, rebirth. You are now in the albedo stage. Everything is being washed clean. The toxic memories, the words that made you doubt yourself, the false beliefs that love must hurt, must drain, must be sacrificed for. All of these begin to slide off you like an old skin you no longer fit into. And as this silence sinks deeper into your being, you realize something the narcissist never wanted you to know. You are stronger in silence, because in silence you no longer react. When you no longer react, you no longer fuel their darkness. And when you no longer fuel their darkness, they have no power over you. This is why no contact is the hardest lesson God uses to free your soul. Because only when you stop running, stop rescuing, stop explaining, stop enduring, stop hoping blindly, can you finally hear your true voice. And within that voice, you recognize the truth you avoided for years. You were never meant to remain in a place where your soul had to shrink to survive. Silence is where God rebuilds what was broken in you. Silence is where you reclaim the parts of yourself you once surrendered in desperation. Silence is where you remember your own light. And the moment you begin to love the silence, you understand a profound truth. Their absence was never a loss. It was the space your soul needed to finally begin to live. Part 6. Identity reconstruction after no contact. When the stillness begins to settle inside you, and the energetic cords that once tied you to the narcissist finally snap, another process begins quietly, the reconstruction of identity. This is the stage most people are never prepared for, because it isn't loud like pain, it isn't intense like soul shock, and it isn't as obvious as the initial panic. It unfolds like dawn, silent, slow, but so steady that nothing can stop it. According to Jung, when a person withdraws from a relationship dominated by another's archetype, they begin entering the process of reintegration of the self, the reclaiming of parts that were split off. This is the point where no contact stops being merely an action. It becomes a ritual of rebirth, a sacred process in which the soul begins to gather back the fragments that were stolen, forgotten, or suppressed during the time you lived under their shadow. This reconstruction begins first at the deepest layer, your beliefs. You start realizing that the truths you once treated as absolute were nothing more than products of manipulation and gaslighting. You realize your worth was never dependent on their approval or disapproval. You see clearly the truth the narcissist always tried to hide from you. They never had the authority to define who you are. And when this realization takes root, the old identity structure, built entirely around your reactions to them, begins to collapse softly. Next comes the emotional layer. After enough time in stillness, your body stops responding through old patterns. You no longer flinch when you see their name. You no longer feel that hollow drop when they stay silent. You no longer get that strange tightness when you imagine them talking to someone else. Your nervous system, once conditioned by cycles of idealization, devaluation, silence, and fake remorse, begins learning a new rhythm, your own. When your emotions are no longer hijacked by their shadow, you suddenly have space to feel the subtle things you once lost. The scent of morning air, the softness of your breath, the peace of sitting alone, the simple joy of doing something just for yourself. These small things, ordinary on the surface, are actually the clearest signals that your soul is returning to a regulated state, where your existence no longer relies on rescuing or enduring anyone. Then the reconstruction reaches its most important layer, identity. Not the identity you used to survive in the toxic relationship, but the original identity you abandoned long ago. One day you look in the mirror, and you don't just see your face, you see the light returning to your eyes, the same light that once dimmed when you tried endlessly to keep peace inside a relationship that fed on your suffering. This is when you begin remembering who you were before they entered your life. The one who loved sincerely, lived honestly, created meaning, and cared for others from the heart, not from fear of abandonment. But then something miraculous happens. You don't just return to who you used to be. You become more. You grow. You sharpen. You awaken. You strengthen. You learn to protect yourself in ways you never knew were possible. Jung called this the moment when the albedo stage transitions to rubedo, when the soul is not only purified, but begins to take new form. You stop being someone's reflection and become your own source of light. You stop finding identity in external validation and anchor it in your deepest truth. You stop being driven by the need to be accepted and start being guided by your soul's mission. This is why the narcissist loses control, not because you left them, but because you no longer exist on a frequency where their hands can reach. Where you are going, Manipulation, gaslighting, and power games cannot survive. It is the place where your identity is rebuilt from your truth, not from what someone else wanted you to believe. And when the reconstruction finally matures, you realize something only those who have walked through darkness understand. No contact doesn't take away your old self. It gives you back your real one.